Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and I'm here with you today to talk about wrapped loops in wire for jewellery making. Now once you've mastered the wrapped loop you will use it almost all the time, from the most basic drop earrings to fancy connectors, even in pendants such as the one I'm wearing today. So join me down at the board and I'll take you through how to make the perfect wrapped loop. So I have a couple of examples here of where you might use a wrapped loop in basic jewellery making. This is a J hook which acts as a clasp. Perfect example of where you're going to add a wrapped loop for security. And in the most simple drop earrings, a little wrapped loop at the top adds to complete security, keeps your beads safe on whatever head pin you choose to use. So I'm going to show you now a foolproof way of creating your own wrapped loops. Now just so we've got something on one end to work with, I'm going to create a small spiral just to hold the bead into position. I'll come on to spirals in another video because they again are an essential part of working in wire for jewellery. So let's just make a small coil down at the bottom, and then I'm going to pop a bead onto this bar of wire. Now the wire I'm demonstrating with today is 18 gauge round wire. This is raw copper, which is nice and soft. It's the soft temper. The design we're going to work on together today, or rather the technique we're going to work on today, is something that will translate to medium temper wire, so your German style craft wire for jewellery making. So let's pick a beautiful Jessie James bead and slide that into position. So let's say that you've finished creating your piece of jewellery, whatever that might be. What we want to do is to create the perfect wrapped loop up at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is think about the orientation of the loop itself. This is a disc, which means I want the disc to show on the front of the design, which means I want the loop to come forwards. So I've made a good strong right angle bend coming forwards on the design. If you're using a traditional ball or disc head pin, it won't make any difference at all which way that bend takes place. The next tool you're going to need are your round nose pliers. So these are my basic round nose pliers, and what we're going to do is to create a round form up at the top. This can be very small to go on small items like beading thread or earrings, or it can be super large to go up onto such things as a neck wire. I tend to make my pendants with very large gaps at the top for wrapped loops so that I can use very heavy chains if I want to. I'm going to make a medium size circular form up at the top, and you can see what I've done so far is wrapped halfway towards that round shape. I'll pop my round nose pliers back in again, and I do teach the two-step technique because it's much easier for people to get used to creating the wrapped loop. So we've made the first half of the bend, and then I'm going to draw the tail of the wire across that nice little right angle bend that we made up at the top. You can take a little time to get that nice and perfect, a beautiful round shape up at the top. I'm then going to support that round shape and ensure that it is central to the little core wire that comes up the centre of your bead or your collection of beads, whatever it is you're working with today. Once I'm happy with that round shape, I'm going to give it a little bit of a squish and a squeeze to make sure that that's nice and firmly set. What we're doing here is slightly hardening that wire without the use of a hammer. What I'm not doing is putting any pressure on where the one tail of wire crosses over the angle section. The key part when you're creating a wrapped loop is wrapping around the core wire. So the core is the piece that travels through that bead. And what we're going to do is take that tail all the way around. Make sure that that's nice and tight. So I'm filling the space up at the top of that bead with a nice neat coil. And I'm just going to tidy that away to make sure that it sits perfectly. And I've got two visible wraps up at the top of this loop. And I'm just going to tighten that slightly to make sure that my loop remains centralised. When you're happy with how your loop is sitting, what we're going to do is just flip this over and use the good side of our flush cutters to trim away any excess wire, always taking care not to put any pressure or marks on our lovely bead. Jessie James beads are beautifully crafted, so I don't want to scratch that. Now what you'll see is that the very end section of that wire, where it's sticking away, where we've just trimmed it, that will always be slightly raised. Needs to be raised for you to be able to cut that last section away. So what I'm going to do now is very gently press that down into the core wire. I'm very carefully opening and closing those bent chain nose pliers to make sure that I get a nice smooth coil effect. And that is how you take your Jessie James bead, some 18 gauge wire, and create the perfect wrapped loop.